podcasting from Memphis, Tennessee. He's a soldier, storyteller, historian, and maybe a bit of a hellraiser. Click, listen, and enjoy. It's Dave Carter on the Ricochet Audio Network.
Yeah. Okay. He's not just a storyteller or a hellraiser and all that other stuff, but he's terribly interested in what's going on all around us. I mean, there are absolutely a lot of things just popping right now on every front. We've got mostly peaceful protests where people set mostly peaceful fires to federal buildings and police precincts. There's a huge spike in mostly peaceful homicides sprouting around like daffodils across the country. So, by the way, yes, hi, I'm Dave Carter, and I'm delighted to have you with us. Delighted to have you join in the observances here today. And so we've got a lot of ground to cover, so let's get right to it, shall we? Mollie Hemingway is a senior editor at The Federalist. She's a senior journalism fellow at Hillsdale College and the 2014 Lincoln Fellow at the Claremont Institute. She's a Fox News contributor where she makes appearances roughly up every 20 minutes or so, it seems. Mollie, do they give you any rest at all over there?
It's actually been a little bit less during the coronavirus times, so okay. I'm enjoying a slight respite. Good,
because there are times I'm thinking they're going to have to clone this lady to make all this work all the time. She's the co-author of the book Justice on Trial, The Kavanaugh Confirmation and the Future of the Court. Her work has appeared in the Wall Street Journal, USA Today, The Washington Post, CNN, The Guardian, National Review, and the Los Angeles Times, among a great many others. And yes, folks, long ago, Mollie was an editor at Ricochet, where she made yours truly look a little better than I probably otherwise would. Mollie, how are you doing this morning?
I'm doing great, and it's great to be here with you.
Thank you so much for taking a few moments to out of your obviously hectic schedule to talk with us. I had a few questions that I jotted down a few days ago, and then, of course, Joe Biden announced his vice president pick, so some of those went right out the window. But, of course, his pick is Kamala Harris. And there are a lot of angles to look at this from, I suppose, but overall, what are your impressions of as to whether this helps or hurts Mr. Biden's prospects in November?
I know a lot of people thought that the pick would be Kamala Harris, but I was a little bit surprised that he went with her because I don't think it's the strongest choice.
Oh.
In 2016, Democrats lost an election that should have been fairly easy for them to win, in part by losing voters in Pennsylvania, Michigan, states like this.
Right.
And there is nothing about this pick that brings those voters back. Joe Biden has lurched to the left himself since he was, decades ago, he was kind of known as a moderate. And recently he's bragging about how progressive he's become. He's renounced his former positions. Like he used to say that you shouldn't be forced to pay for abortion if you had conscientious objections. Now he says you should be forced. Like he's just lost all of his moderation. And then instead of picking someone who was moderate, who could balance that out, he leaned into this by picking a left-wing California Democrat. And she does have strengths. I think she's very charismatic. She's very eager campaigner and whatnot. But a lot of people also think that even that wears thin pretty quickly. If she's been on a national stage, whether it was in the Kavanaugh hearings or in her own failed presidential campaign, It started with a huge amount of promise, and then it just kind of fell off with no real benefit.
And what were the reasons? Is I don't recall the reasons why she lost her appeal in the primaries. Why was that?
I don't know. It was clear she was connected to Obama people, and I think that explains how she was chosen for vice president, too. Yeah. She had a big Obama-style rollout. You might remember that was she had that massive crowd in California at her announcement. She raised a lot of money. She burned through all the money. She never got any delegates. She just never tracked with people. And a lot of the conventional wisdom is that it's good to have a black woman on the ticket for black support. And that is true that lack of enthusiasm among black voters did hurt Hillary Clinton. But Joe Biden actually does pretty well with black voters. He was the one who got the black vote in the primary. And I'm not sure Kamala Harris is as attractive to black voters as white people, white pundits seem to think she will be.
Yeah, well, and he was kind enough to tell folks whether or not they are black, depending on whether or not they support him, which is very, very thoughtful of him. I'm trying to think how the media will react to efforts to scrutinize Senator Harris and her record. Let me explain where I'm coming from this way. One of my biggest pet peeves is when people criticize someone because of immutable characteristics over which they have no control. I literally could not care less about Senator Harris's gender. I couldn't conceivably care less about her ethnicity, the color of the skin, any of that. But I've read people commenting on whether she's black or Jamaican or whatever, and to me that means nothing, and I think it's infantile for folks to prioritize that kind of thing over against her record. To me, that's where it's at. Right? Her record, her philosophy of the relationship between of the individual to the state, her ideological predisposition, that means a great deal. Her record as California's Attorney General, where she tried to criminalize dissent on the subject of global warming and harass nonprofit policy groups, demanding their donor lists and financial information to the point that a federal court stepped in and made her stop. Her efforts to destroy Brett Kavanaugh's life, which you wrote a book about, her voting record, those kinds of things matter a lot. My question is, how long do you think it will take those of us who look into her record to be accused of racism and misogyny and all the usual stuff? About 10 minutes, 20 minutes?
I'm sure it has already happened. Yeah. But related to what you say, she does have a record. She has a lengthy record. It's a record that is easy to evaluate. The moment she was picked as the nominee, the Democratic and media spin came out that she was a pragmatic moderate. I think with pragmatic, they were trying to say she's willing to change her positions for political gain, but say it in a nicer way. And that might be kind of true. Yeah. There is no definition by which she's a moderate. I mean, you listed some of the things that show her far left positions. Mm-hmm. You can think of others, her positions on guns. You mentioned the environment. She tried to imprison pro-life journalists for doing work exposing crimes being committed at Planned Parenthoods in California. I mean, she's not just, in other words, she's not just pro-choice or supportive of abortion. She actually tries to jail people who expose the wrongdoing associated with it. That's not moderate. That's not moderate by any definition. And yet many people in the media tried to claim she was without providing any substantiation for the claim, any evidence to support this idea. And her record is another reason why I think she had less support in the primaries than people anticipated her having, because she has a very mixed record that sort of embraces all that's wrong with the criminal justice system and none of what's right. Yeah. And that turned off a lot of voters there, too. Something you mentioned made me think of something else about her pragmatic way of adopting whatever policy position might help her out. And that's what Joe Biden has done. I mean, we could play, and I'm sure people will play, his past positions on a great many issues, which are now have gone 180 degrees the other way. So, but as she's pragmatic, too, I'm wondering who is pulling whose strings at this point. I think all politicians have a bit of this in them, but on the big picture level, they really are. These are two candidates who really are far to the left, particularly, and when I'm saying that, Joe Biden of the last decade as opposed to his previous lengthy service. Right. And you learn a lot about people by who they pick as vice president. When Bill Clinton was trying to take over the Democratic Party and move it away from some of its extremes, he didn't pick a more liberal vice president, well, slightly more liberal, but he picked another Southern Democrat to say, no, we are going this way. And when Donald Trump was trying to convince people he really meant it when he said he would govern like a conservative, he picked Mike Pence, who really did reassure a lot of conservative voters that they could, take a gamble on him. Joe Biden picking someone so far left, I think that what he's really saying is he wants this to be the direction, or the people who made the pick, who I think, probably the Obama team was heavily involved in choosing Kamala Harris. They really want the direction of the party to be this far left progressive direction that persecutes political opponents. Right. Well, they're doing a great job. I'm going to change gears just a moment. Speaking of the charge of racism, which happens so much lately that it's all but lost its punch. Right. It's just starting to lose meaning too. I think Thomas Sowell said the charge of racism is like ketchup. You can put it on almost anything. It's at the point now that where Heather McDonald is vilified for speaking to verifiable crime statistics that are just as easily verified as looking at the day's news or the day's weather report. The awful reality is that approximately 14% of the population is committing over half the nation's homicides. And I've heard you several years ago make the point
that was made very powerfully by the late Daniel Patrick Moynihan in the 60s in his book Beyond the Melting Pot, and that is the tragic consequences with respect to out of wedlock births in the black community, and the effect that has and the single parent households have on the children in that community. When Moynihan wrote about this, I believe the illegitimacy rate was around 25-30%. Now it's over 70%. So do you see a link between that breakdown in family structure and the epidemic of crime and violence and misery that so many in the black community are suffering all over the country?
We have had in recent months all of these riots and protest movements related to the killing of unarmed black men by police officers, right, which is a fairly rare occurrence, however awful it is. And it's always horrible to see these things. But and there were all these conversations about race and racism, and it seemed like the one thing nobody wanted to talk about was the issue that you just raised, which is the family and how families relate to interactions with cops or other things that you kind of want to avoid. And it's absolutely true that the lack of presence of black men in black families can lead to all sorts of really bad downstream effects, like failure to graduate high school, or literacy problems, drug addiction, interaction with the police, incarceration, difficulty getting jobs. And it just is very frustrating to see people who say they want to talk about how to improve the lives of young black men not talk about the number one thing that we could be doing, which is encouraging family formation. And this is not just in the black community. I mean, since Daniel Patrick Moynihan talked about this, the rates of illegitimate birth have gone up in every different demographic.
Sure, yeah.
And white people are where black people were when he wrote that report.
Yes.
And it affects everybody. If we really care about our fellow man, we would want to work on family formation and preservation, because these things really have important effects on the lives and happiness of people. But I think it kind of shows that a lot of people didn't actually care about those things so much as political power, and that's why they don't talk about something that actually would make a really good difference in people's lives.
Well, you answered my next question, actually, because we hear folks in the media, the academic world, sports, entertainment, elsewhere, talk about root causes, right? And they always diagnose poverty and things like that as the root cause, unemployment, what have you. But then they don't address what causes those maladies to begin with. And I'm just trying to figure out why so many people willfully turn a blind eye to the actual cause of what's going on.
Well, and I think, I said very uncharitably that it was a desire for political power. I also think it's difficult, and also it makes people feel like hypocrites. We all have, failures in our own family lives, and we don't want to address our own failures, and we don't want to tell other people what to do, because it's difficult to tell other people what to do. It's difficult when people in our own family tell us that they're headed to divorce or something like that, to encourage them to work harder. And so we just don't do it. And I do think this is a pre-political problem. This is something about a breakdown in the American character that has these political side effects.
Okay, yeah. 'Cause, I hear what you're saying. By the same token, at least with respect to some things, if I get a speeding ticket, I'm going to tell everyone in the house, hey, y'all, slow down. We can't afford the insurance. Slow down a little bit. Don't do the stupid. I told my kids, don't make the same mistakes that I've made. Make fresh mistakes. Be inventive. Be creative. But don't make the same mistakes I made. But I guess it's more difficult to do that in a public way.
Well, it is, and I think it really is. There is a reason why it's important. It is difficult to form a family and maintain a family.
Right.
And it's something that does require a lot of community support and family support to do. And it's just so beyond what a lot of people are capable right now. It's so much easier to just kind of yell into the wind.
Right.
But I do think we all should do it. And I think we should all do it in our personal lives first and foremost, working on our own marriages, making them happy and healthy, setting good examples for our kids, and encouraging them in their marriages. That stuff really does matter, I think, and also helping people in your community, if we really do care about these things.
I agree. Let's talk about the peaceful protest for a moment. I can't get this image out of my head of the reporter standing in front of this huge structure fire in Minneapolis, looking into the camera, looking dead at us and saying, these are mostly peaceful protests. And I wondered, whatever happened to old Baghdad Bob?
Yes.
And now I know. He was the guy, for folks that may not know, who was assuring us that Saddam Hussein was firmly in control, even as his regime was collapsing and we were knocking out of power. And there stood this press guy for Hussein saying everything was fine. And now we saw him in Minneapolis. Is it cowardice on the media's part, or are they true believers in this revolutionary cause that we've got to dismantle society somehow?
I think they really probably deep down understand that violent riots and assaults on cities across the country are bad for their political team. And so they're just trying to downplay them because they know that people don't like riots, and they don't like physical assaults, and they don't like arson, and they don't like destroying small businesses in every city across the land. And so if you can't keep that from happening, you just lie about it. And they also know that I think they're really true believers also in that they think this is the way to accomplish the social change that they want. My favorite example of the media lies about this was that Associated Press story where they said that when a mostly peaceful protest led to arson and assault, they said that was the peacefulness intensifying.
Oh yeah, they made s'mores. Yeah, that's. I didn't hear about that. Well, people don't like the dysfunction in society, but they don't like being lied to either. And the press is not already not held in a great deal of esteem. They're not doing themselves any favors with this.
I was just thinking how in 2016 they really messed up, and I felt that regardless of what the election result would be. The election result being that Trump won made it so that you couldn't deny that they messed up, but they messed up either way. They did not understand the country. They did not understand the fundamentals of the issue. They were lying about the issues and the candidates, and it was really, really egregious. And yet 2020, I think, is just so much worse. Like you see it in the coverage of Kamala Harris, how they just redefine her in the way that they think will be most politically advantageous. They lie about the candidates, again, being, cartoonishly hostile to Trump or Republicans and cartoonishly positive toward Democrats. They lie about the riots. They don't cover things that are they don't cover economic success like they would if it were a Democratic president who was overseeing the response to the pandemic. They don't cover the reality of what riots do to inner cities like they would if they were, caring about being honest. And it's very scary because you want a free and fair media to help preserve the republic. And what we have in many cases is just egregious propaganda.
Well, they're an extension of the Democrat National Committee. I mean, they lionize previous Republican presidential nominees, people that they savaged previously when they were either running or, in the case of George W. Bush, were in office. They savaged them. They compared them to Hitler. Mitt Romney was just the Antichrist to these folks, and now he's qualified. He's walking around with a halo.
I think I've actually thought that they were the public relations arm of the Democratic Party for a long time. Yeah. I mean, not always, but frequently. But I actually think they're worse now. I think that sometimes you watch like a CNN or something like that, and you think the Democratic Party itself would have more shame than these people do right now.
Sure.
And so they've gone beyond. I think more that the Democratic Party is the political arm of the media, not that the media are the PR arm of the political party.
Yeah.
The media are the ones in charge, and they're the ones driving, and they're completely unaccountable. They not only are they not accountable, they get awards the worse they do, and the more they harm the country.
They hand the awards to themselves.
They do.
But, they're making Pravda look fair and balanced in comparison. Last question, mail-in ballots. Some of the folks who used to tell us that massive voting fraud would take place and mail-in ballots would be very vulnerable to voter fraud. They've changed their tune now for obvious reasons that we just spoke of. I fully expect on Election Day, Chicago will have drive-through voting for Hearsts, for example, and it'll be fine. Do you have any sense as to how this mail-in voting initiative may play out?
So I was just talking about how awful the media are, but I think that this is one of their more difficult messages that they're trying to accomplish. So on the one hand, they're saying that it is insane to think that a rushed move to mail-in balloting across the country would have any downsides. So that's one of their messages, that Donald Trump is crazy for saying that there will be problems with this. And on the other hand, they're claiming that he's doing something to the post office that will harm mail-in balloting. And I don't think they realize you have to pick one of those messages,
right,
and it can't be both. And I think they're probably going to drop the first one and move toward the second one, but that just helps him with his ultimate message. I am not a fan of mail-in balloting. I mean, absentee balloting is one thing, but I think particularly when you're rushing to move to mail-in ballots, it is so ripe for exploitation.
Oh, sure.
And at a time like this, I don't think that's very healthy for the Republic. I also think it's just important for having to have a day of voting with very few exceptions, where you, in those exceptions being like because you're too sick to come or you're in the military or something like that, where everybody takes the day and makes sure they go and vote and they all prepare on that day. When you spread it out over months, it just is not healthy for the Republic. And I'm not a big fan, but particularly not to do it in a rushed fashion. Well, so I pray everything goes well in the states across the country and that everybody work really hard to ensure the integrity of these ballots, because it is important.
I predict that they will find truckloads of ballots after Election Day, and those truckloads of ballots will be largely for which party?
Right. Well, I mean, the thing is, there's cheating on both sides. I think that one side might be a little better at cheating, but you don't want to provide opportunities or incentives for such cheating. But yeah, in a lot of these large urban centers, they are controlled by Democrats. If they were, I mean, I think it's more about the ease with which you can cheat in a city than particular political persuasion. Right. But if people don't accept the result, we've had 4 years of Democrats just refusing to accept the 2016 election result. And it's been very damaging to the country. And it has produced a lot of hatred and violence. And it's not good. And should Trump win again, I think it might be important to get people on the record now that they will accept it finally, even if they haven't, after the last 4 years.
That's a good idea. Yeah. I don't know how successful it'll be, but I think it's a good idea. They're going to equivocate, but it's worth trying to pin them down. Mm-hmm. Well, look, it's been very nice of you to stop in and chat with us today.
Thank you. It's been so fun to hear you, and thank you.
Well, I've been a fan of yours since Ricochet, and now I turn on the TV all hours of the day and night, and there you are. They must give you like a closet someplace. Here, go take a nap. Here's a cot. We'll bring you back out in 20 minutes.
Sometimes it is about like that.
All right. Well, thanks so much, and feel free to drop in anytime. I'll have some good Cajun jokes set up for you next time, all right?
Thanks, Dave.
All right, folks, that's Mollie Hemingway on the Dave Carter program.
Compelling conversation and maybe a giggle or two. It's Dave Carter on Ricochet.
It's Mollie Hemingway. She's always a delight to talk to. I actually had the pleasure of meeting her and talking with her, getting to know her a little bit before she came to Fox as a contributor. And this is at the Ricochet 200th podcast in Los Angeles a few years ago. And she's authentic is what she is. I mean, she's gracious, just as gracious and kind, and certainly as articulate behind the scenes as she is when the cameras and microphones are on. So always a delight to catch up with her. And I'm glad you folks are here to listen in as well. And if you like this program, I mean, if you're going head over heels or ass over tea kettle or whatever in love with the veritable feast of podcast, I'll start to say a buffet of podcast offerings. You want that buffet? No, it's not a buffet over there. It's a feast of podcast offerings here on the Ricochet Audio Network. From the flagship podcast with former Reagan speechwriter Peter Robinson and Cheers executive producer Rob Long and the brilliant writer and columnist James Lilacs, as they discuss and engage with some of the most interesting personalities and minds in the political world today. And then there's my friend Dave Sussman, who's got his Whiskey Politics podcast going full speed ahead. He does a phenomenal job. Commentary Magazine has a great podcast here, as does former Secretary of Education Bill Bennett. So it's all here for the listening. And if you want to do more than listen, let's say you want to comment on the podcasts themselves or comment on the articles that you see over on the main feed. Well, maybe you want to read and comment on the things behind the paywall where our members speak up and speak out. You can do that for just $4.50 a month. And if you want to do still more than that, maybe you want to write your own articles and see them published here on this website. Well, for $5 a month, you can do that too. And I'll go one better for you. There's a better offer. You want to do all that for free? Hey, I'm here for you. Just go to ricochet.com/gumbo, because I'm from Louisiana, and that's just how we roll. Ricochet.com gumbo gets you 30 days of Ricochet for free. You can do all the reading and writing and commenting and publishing that you want, and that way you get a feel for the place, see if you like it. And then you can go join after that 30 days for $4.50 or $5 a month, depending on what you want to do, and you're home. So again, that's for that free 30-day trial. Head over to ricochet.com/GUMBO. You can join the conversation.
It's not that he has a sense of humor. It's that a sense of humor has him. It's Dave Carter on Ricochet.
Okay, this is the fun part, because what we're going to do this time on the member segment here is that we have something like a class reunion going on, because my guest here at Ricochet, he was here even before the doors of the joint were open. He's an interesting guy, very well educated, articulate, and intellectually rigorous guy, and he has impeccably good manners. But despite those flaws, he and his wife were kind enough to take me in a few years ago when I was driving through Minneapolis in the 18-wheeler, which is where I met Dwayne Oyen and his lovely wife. Now, here's a quick reminder, folks. If you take me up on my offer of a free trial membership at Ricochet and then become a regular member here, there's a good chance that you could wind up here on the program with me as well. I mean, worse things have happened, I suppose. Now, my friend Dwayne Oyen joined Ricochet back in May of 2010, I think, when we were just on Facebook at that point. Anyway, Mr. Oyen is retired now, so when I asked him for a few biographical bullet points I could use for an introduction, he was kind enough to write it all out for me, so I'll be kind enough to read it because it's pure gold. Dwayne writes, and I quote, "Just as those who are famous for being famous, I am noteworthy for being mediocre. A true jack of all trades who isn't good at much of anything and has spent a whole life proving it. Thus, I've worked as a bad professional musician for a formerly regulated industry in the middle of its deregulation, for the federal government, for federal contractors, spent a lot of time in the Pentagon, lobbied Congress, worked in venture capital, been the first employee of a startup, worked in the medical industrial complex, both in the product design and production, and as a healthcare giver, run clinical trials, and retired from a major university where I was a licensed nurse for 20 years but never got a nursing paycheck. And only went through law school when I was sure I would never have to practice law. Over a 40-year career, I've had my employer go bankrupt, be sold, spun off, or fail as a business 4 times. Now, in my golden years, I sucked the blood of the taxpayers by draining monthly stipends out of the Medicare and Social Security funds," unquote. And it's a pleasure to welcome him onto the program today. Good morning, Dwayne.
How you doing?
I'm doing good. How are you, sir?
Oh, we can't complain at all here in deep blue Maryland.
Well, what good would it do? I'm trying to think, but between the two of us, there can't be that many jobs left to try out, I guess.
Yeah, well, politics.
Yeah, well, that's true.
And I never had the desire to do any of that sort of thing, for sure.
Yeah.
Although I am involved deeply in politics at the very local level.
Okay.
Because I'm one of the consigliaries of the Homeowners Association, and that really gives you a good flavor of up-close democracy and all sorts of things that you learn. And in fact, I'm going to have to do a member feed post on what it's like to be involved at the ground level of pure democracy in New Hampshire style.
I would love to see that.
Only even smaller than that.
Right, yeah. And you're a grandfather too now, right?
Finally. Absolutely forever. Our daughter was almost 40 when we finally got a grandson.
Oh, my goodness, yeah. Well, ain't it fun?
Oh, man. She's 2.5. Oh, man, we have so much fun with her.
I love your profile photo.
That's the reason we're in Maryland rather than Minnesota, because now we're, a dozen miles away from her.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Across the country.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So let's talk current events on a national scale for just a little bit. I wanted to get your thoughts on a few things. I know you follow current events pretty closely. I talked with Mollie Hemingway earlier about the presumptive Democratic presidential nominee Joe Biden's selection of Kamala Harris to be his vice president. Do you have a general sense of whether you think that helps or hurts Biden's chances in November, or do you think it makes much difference one way or the other?
If people actually paid attention and read stuff and thought about such things, it should hurt. But, Kamala Harris is going to be a picture and a bumper sticker and a New York Times headline that says she's a pragmatic moderate. And, of course, she's anything but.
No.
And in fact, the whole idea of characterizing her as anything other than a for sale, ambitious politico who will say anything or do anything to meet the needs of the immediate moment is a mirage. This woman. There was a guy named John P. Roche back in the 60s who was actually an advisor. He was a White House staff guy in the John F. Kennedy administration. And a few years later, we're talking about, the golden days of Camelot and all that stuff. Right. And we were reading all these glorious pans to the noble Robert Kennedy. He of the great vision, who wanted to make the world better and all that sort of thing. And Rose said, Bob Kennedy wouldn't know a principle from a fire hydrant. That is Ms. Harris.
Now, but in a sense, in fairness, that's true to some extent or another of most politicians, right? They tend to be a person.
Oh, absolutely.
They tend to be a person of their most recent conviction, right?
Yep. But
you're saying she takes it kind of to a far level. Well, let's talk about President Trump for a moment. I suspect, based on conversations that you and I have had over the years, that I could describe you as somewhat of a reluctant Trump support, which was fair because I was too. I came to support him reluctantly. Is that your case as well?
I'm not sure that's how I would put it.
Okay.
I was absolutely never Trump all the way through in 2016.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm a supporter of the rule of law and a supporter of the institution of the presidency. Donald Trump is personally, utterly unqualified and unfit for office. The big problem is that everybody he's up against opposing him is far less qualified and far less fit for office.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
So my position is that I want to vote for somebody that I feel good voting for, and there's a whole bunch of good people. Back in 2016, I wrote in a candidate. Here's the issue. I live in Deep Blue, Maryland, so my vote means absolutely nothing, so I feel pretty comfortable characterizing my vote as a vote against Joe Biden and everything that he and any of his people stand for.
Right.
But I have trouble casting a ballot when it makes no difference whatsoever on behalf of somebody who's 9 years old. Okay? And so therefore I'll write in Nikki Haley or Tom Cotton or Marco Rubio or, a grown-up.
Because in your case, I guess it's largely.
But if I was in a state where there was even the remotest prayer that it might make a difference in terms of winning the state, I would hold my nose and probably vote for Trump.
Which is kind of what I did in 2016.
Yeah,
I was a cruise guy.
If I lived in Tennessee, or Minnesota or whatever, or Wisconsin, or Iowa, or Michigan, or Pennsylvania, just because the Buckley rule was vote for the most conservative alternative that has a chance to be elected.
Right. The most rightward-leaning viable candidate was, I think, the words that they used.
Right. Yeah. Those are the words.
So what do you make, I won't dwell too much on this, but I am curious, passingly curious, what do you make of the folks that are still, quote-unquote, never Trump, and to the point that some of them, I think, are even supporting Biden, which puts them in direct opposition to policies that they have advocated for decades?
A whole bunch of those people are not never Trump.
Okay.
Okay? Because they're the same people. Remember, in 2008, Christopher Buckley, Kenneth Edelman, you can go down a list of a whole bunch of people. Jeffrey Hart, the professor from Dartmouth, announced that they were voting for Barack Obama and would not vote for McCain because of Sarah Palin. This didn't have anything whatsoever to do with Donald Trump at that time. These were the people who decided, and a certain group of people in the working class who are not of the glitterati are I call it Upper West Side Manhattan syndrome. Okay? And they don't like Donald Trump or Sarah Palin or any of these other people. Now, I happen to think that those two people are both, foolish ciphers and don't have a whole lot of substance behind what they do, but they represent a large group of people who have a right to be heard. And those people are the people who, if you're looking at it from a New York standpoint, they're the people in Queens. And the people on the Upper West Side have nothing but disdain for the people from Queens. Oh. Archie Bunker syndrome.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
And it's not our kind of people. NOKOP. And that's what rules. And that's what, so therefore I would never support probably somebody who would write for the Bulwark.
Yeah. Okay. Well, and you see, I had not made the connection between Queens, but now that you mentioned it, it clicks. I mean, I know people that are Archie Bunker types, and they annoy the hell out of me. But they're right at times, even if they don't, if they can't articulate why they are right. They have good instincts. In an early podcast
about 2 years ago, John Podhoretz, on one of the commentary podcasts, was talking about referring to Trump, and he was quoting some people that from his neighborhood who talked about Trump as being a fisher from Queens.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that kind of hit home. Like, okay, the people who live over here, they don't like Donald because he's Queens, not because he's Donald.
Yeah.
I mean, he's just, he's a 9-year-old idiot. That doesn't have anything to do with it. The fact that he's from Queens was unforgivable.
Okay. Yeah, okay, so it's a class distinction as much as anything else.
Oh, very much so.
So let me dig a little deeper, but on a different question, and then we'll move on to some more fun things. But I've been wanting to ask you this for a few years, so this is my chance. I don't know what you made of it back in 2016, but there was the quote-unquote Flight 93 argument, if you recall. Basically, the conservatives were in the position of stopping something horrific from happening to the country, right? Even as the passengers on Flight 93 on September 11, 2001 prevented terrorists from flying that plane into the White House or wherever their target was. I wasn't sure back then that was the right analogy, but I believe that there's such a thing as a point of no return. Okay? Reagan used to say that freedom was never more than one generation away from extinction. I think he was right. So, given what's happening now, and I know there are folks that say every single election is a Flight 93 moment, or I would prefer to call it a point of no return. But when we look across what's happening in the country right now, cities that are parts of them being burned to the ground, anarchy reigns. Do you think that this is such a moment that we're reaching a point of no return here?
I would consider that a possibility, except for the fact that I think the reality right now is that that this whole big, long list of issues will be moderated a whole bunch if the, quote, right guy wins in November. In other words, if you recall, right after the inauguration in 1993, the problem of homelessness in Washington, D.C. went away. Completely disappear.
Yeah.
We had homelessness and Snyder all over Washington, D.C. for the 12 previous years, and all of a sudden the problem completely disappeared
like magic,
in 1993. I wonder why that was.
Yeah, right. It was like magic.
And so the defund the police stuff will be completely eliminated in January of 2021.
Okay.
If the quote right guy wins, and there are several other things like that. Now, will good sound politics and freedom and free markets and the kinds of things that we believe in, responsible people in the world, will they be set back by the fact that guys like Bill Kristol and George Will seem to believe that the Republicans have to be punished for their temerity and actually not throwing out people right at the very beginning? The movement will be set back a whole bunch. But the world isn't going to end.
Okay. Now we're going to shift topics completely in the interest of time, but I want to have some fun conversation too. Am I correct in remembering that you were part of Ricochet back when it was nothing more than a Facebook page?
That is exactly correct. I first saw the term Ricochet referred to on a post at Powerline by John Hinderock.
Oh.
He was talking. It was actually his wife Lori said something about, "Oh, is that about Ricochet?" And I thought to myself, "What's a ricochet?" So then I did a little search, checked the link, and found that there was a Facebook group on Ricochet. And so I went and started visiting that. And there were people like, Peter and Rob would show up once in a while, Felisa Jenkins Birney, Andrea Ryan,
right.
Kennedy Smith, Mike LaRoche, people like that. And we just started the conversation then. And so we were actually a very active Facebook group for months before the site went live. And then Rob came in and said, "The site's live, pour it over, and now you'll be in the site." So
you were actually on a part of Ricochet before I got to the party then, along with Andrea and Kennedy Smith. God, I miss Kennedy Smith. But because Rob and Peter reached out to me and said, "We have an idea. Rob and I want to talk to you, and you may think that we're nuts." And I did think that they were nuts, but I went ahead and took them up on their offer. But so I was over on the Facebook page, but you guys were already there. There's like a little delightful little group that already coalesced there.
Yep.
So have you been, aside from my little evening spent with you and Annie, which is great, have you guys been to any meetups yet?
Well, we've been to there's the ones in Annapolis, of course.
Okay.
At George's place, George Nassau. I can't ever pronounce his last name. And let's see, what was the other one?
Well, I'm terrible at pronouncing last names. So,
yeah. And then, of course, we went to Powerline meetups and stuff. But most of the time, the Ricochet meetups have been in places that we weren't anywhere, able to get near.
Yeah.
But we've tried to go when we could.
So what is it that keeps you hanging around the place? Ricochet, that is. What keeps you hanging around Ricochet and writing? I'm glad that you do, but what's the continuing attraction there for you?
Well, it's an essential, it's an essential platform. You've got to have that. So even if you aren't just living there and spending all your time there, it's a great value. If you look at all the conservative media companies that are out there that are trying to get started and get moving, Ricochet has the right combination of commenting and how it works, and the podcasts, which are absolutely great, and it's priced right.
Yeah,
and it from a value standpoint. So, like the other people, like the Daily Wire and the Dispatch and all those other guys, they're priced roughly double what makes sense.
Okay.
Ricochet's priced in the National Review range, and therefore it's a good value. And you can have 3 or 4 sites like that you're part of and be in the community fully, and you have a good variety of the different things that are on tap to offer. And yet, it's a value that makes sense.
Well, and it's interesting to me in that not everyone sings in unison. Not everyone is in agreement on everything, but they're civil.
I can give you some names of guys that I met loggerheads and have been at loggerheads with for years and years. Because, of course, I'm much less Trumpy.
Right.
Many folks.
Right. Yeah. Well, yeah. So there's all stripes here, but they keep it civil. They keep it interesting.
Yeah.
So, Well, I'm glad you're part of the festivities.
We still have the common factor, and that is that we believe in the U.S. as the good guy in the world. We believe in free markets, and we believe in liberty, and we believe in liberty over, quote, phony equality.
Right.
And so many things that fit right into that rubric make sense, and that big picture can't get lost.
Yeah. In other words, the founders, in large measure, got it right, and we want to preserve that. Man, you're cool. It's a lot of fun. Well, I'm glad that you're part of the festivities here, and glad you're able to take some time and talk with us today, man. It's been fun. Now,
any old time.
Please give my best to your lovely wife and Meredith and Michelle and the little grandbaby. I love the pictures that you've posted of her. It's just great.
Well, come and see us in Annapolis, and next time I'm back in Memphis, I'll look you up again. Please
do. Yeah, certainly, I will. And if you do find yourself in Memphis, number one, you'll need personal protection, and I've got that. So come on over, and we'll show you where the good food is, and we'll have a good time.
All right, sir.
All right, thank you. You take care, folks. That's Dwayne Oyen on the Dave Carter program. That's Dwayne Oyen. Always a treat to talk to old friends like Dwayne and Andrew Ryan, Michael Rush, Kennedy Smith, the original crew. Good as gold, man. That was fun.
Wake up! Dave Carter.
Well, it's about time to wrap this party up. Now, if you like what you heard today, I encourage you to go over to the iTunes place, give us a good rating, leave a few comments if you like. That sort of thing helps the program out and helps us grow. We're currently heard in over 45 countries around the world, but your help is always appreciated and definitely always needed, believe me. I invite you to take a moment and head over to my website at davecarteronline.com. Check out the articles that I've written over the years. More travel pieces that I wrote while in the military, and there's articles there that I wrote from Ricochet and have appeared in the Federalist and more. There's also a podcast page where you can hear this podcast, for example, and then conversations with Peter Robinson. Rob Long, the Secretary of Veterans Affairs, was last week. Talked with David Diebel, author Andrew Clavin, James Lilacs, and Pat Sajak, and more. So go check that out. It's a lot of good, interesting conversation there. And then there's a page on the site called The Inkwell. That's where I write more introspective pieces, as I did just a few days ago. So check it all out at davecarteronline.com and see what you think. And until next time, with my thanks to Mollie Hemingway and my dear friend Dwayne Oyen, and of course to you, the listener, I'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to The Dave Carter Show. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes so you won't miss a single episode. And while you're there, please leave a review and tell us what you think. And on behalf of all of us at The Dave Carter Show and the Ricochet Audio Network, thank you for listening.